My name is Emily. I'm 38, and for the past 12 years, I believe my life with Evan, 40, was steady, predictable, safe. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of quiet that smells faintly of home-cooked dinners and worn wooden floors. Evan sat across from me at the dinner table, his posture casual, like he had been waiting for this moment all day. The aroma of roasted chicken lingered in the air, and the clock ticked loudly in a way that suddenly made every second feel unbearable. Then he said it. Laura, I just can't do this anymore. This life, it's beige. I deserve more than this, more than us. I froze. My fork clattered onto my plate. I stared at him, searching his face for a trace of a joke, a sigh of stress, anything that could make sense of this statement. But his eyes were calm, expectant, like a waiter waiting for me to nod in agreement that the wrong dish had arrived. What do you mean? I asked, my voice tight. We're fine. We have a home, a life. Fine? Laura, no. I need passion, excitement. I feel like I'm wasting my best years. I want out. The words hung in the air, not a plea, not a tearful confession, just a declaration. I remember sitting there, trying to absorb them. The room suddenly too small, the familiar walls suffocating. We weren't struggling. We had a nice house, 2 cars, savings. It was predictable, yes, maybe even boring, but it was mine. Our life had been a tapestry of shared dreams, or so I thought. I took a slow breath. Evan, you absolutely do deserve better, I said, surprising even myself. My voice was steady. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I didn't even try to argue. He blinked, a flash of surprise crossing his face. I think he expected a fight. He expected me to crumble. You mean you're okay with this? I mean, I said, choosing my words carefully, you deserve the life you want. Let's make that happen. Truly. Evan's jaw relaxed slightly. Relief? Anticipation? I couldn't tell. That night, while he went to his weekly poker game with the guys, or maybe to call Samantha his ex, I sat in the kitchen, silent, letting the shock settle into something colder, something methodical. My heart was heavy, but my mind was already moving, calculating. Step 1. Lawyer up. I called my attorney, someone sharp and highly recommended, and explained the situation, every word Evan had said. Her advice was immediate and clear. Don't move out. Don't make any sudden financial decisions. Document everything. Step 2. Inventory of truth. I spent the next morning creating a spreadsheet. My life had been numbers and order before it had been love and compromise. I listed every asset, the house, which had been inherited from my grandmother and legally mine alone, the investment portfolio, untouched, predating my relationship with Evan, our cars, one of which Evan owned outright, the other my name on the title, and our debts. And then there were the joint credit cards. Over the years, Evan, Samantha, had used them to maintain a certain lifestyle. Dinners out, designer purchases, weekend trips. The total came to around $38,000. I had quietly paid the bills most months, ensuring our life ran smoothly. But now, those numbers weren't just numbers. They were evidence. Step 3. Preparing for a new beginning. I printed rental applications for a few small apartments. Quiet, reasonable, manageable. When Evan returned that evening, I slid the papers across the table, along with my spreadsheet, neatly divided into assets and debts. Look, I said, keeping my voice calm, almost too calm. This is what half of the shared debt looks like. The house, my investments, their non-marital assets. But these debts, these are ours to split. Evan stared at the pages, his expression flickering from casual expectation to a shadow of panic. What is this? He asked, unease creeping into his tone. It's a fresh start, I said softly. This is reality. You wanted freedom. Here it is. For a second, he didn't speak. Then he leaned back, almost impressed, or maybe calculating. I couldn't tell. I realized then that I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was something quieter, resolute. Shock had morphed into clarity. The life we'd built was unraveling, yes, but I had a choice in how to respond. I could crumble, or I could act. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Evan glanced at me, a question lingering in his eyes. But I didn't answer with emotion. I answered with the quiet calm of someone who had already begun to plan the next move. I was no longer just Laura, the woman betrayed. I was Laura, the strategist, and the first move was mine. The morning after Evan's declaration, I woke early, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. My mind was a whirlwind, yet beneath it all, there was a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Shock had faded, replaced by resolve. If Evan wanted to abandon our life, fine. But he wasn't going to drag me into chaos or bankruptcy with him. I brewed coffee, the bitter aroma grounding me, and opened my laptop. Spreadsheets, columns, categories. It was comforting in a way nothing else had been lately. I began listing everything: assets, debts, monthly expenditures, everything. Assets. The house, inherited from my grandmother, deed solely in my name, confirmed with my lawyer. Investment accounts, untouched funds, predating Evan. Cars, my sedan paid off, Evan's SUV paid off. Debts, 2 joint credit cards. Over the years, they had been used primarily by Samantha. Spa days, boutique shopping, weekend trips with friends. The total? Around $38,000. I paused. The sum was staggering. Not in the realm of ruin, but in the quiet, insidious way it revealed years of misaligned priorities. I had been funding someone else's idea of a glamorous life while believing we were building ours together. Step 2, as my attorney called it, was documentation. Every statement, every charge over $50, every errant weekend splurge went into the spreadsheet. I highlighted household essentials in green, personal spending in pink. The pattern was undeniable. By midday, the spreadsheet stretched across multiple tabs, hundreds of entries. Each line told a story, of dinners I didn't get to enjoy, of vacations that felt borrowed, of items that now sat unused in closets. Samantha's influence had been subtle, almost invisible, and yet its footprint was enormous. I leaned back and looked around our kitchen, the scene of Evan's casual betrayal. The silence was almost deafening, but it wasn't empty. It hummed with potential. I could feel it, the first tremors of control returning to my hands. When Evan returned that evening, he found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and a laptop. I slid the spreadsheet toward him, my voice calm but firm. "Here," I said, "I've prepared a clear picture. These are the debts we share, the assets we have separately. The house, my investments, non-marital. The debt, however, is ours to split." Evan's brow furrowed. You actually made a spreadsheet." I gave him a faint smile. "I told you, I want this to be fair, transparent, no surprises." His eyes flickered, something unspoken passing between us. Perhaps a flicker of panic. Perhaps realization that this wasn't going to be the easy exit he imagined. "Laura, this is..." He trailed off, uncertain. "Reality," I said softly. "You wanted freedom. Here it is. And yes, it has consequences." For a moment, I thought I saw regret, or maybe just calculation, in his eyes. But I didn't flinch. This wasn't about anger. It was about truth, and I would wield it like a shield. I spent the next days cross-referencing statements with our calendar, marking every personal expense, tracking patterns, categorizing meticulously. Each entry, each highlighted purchase, became a piece of evidence, not for revenge, but for clarity, for fairness. And slowly, I felt the cold satisfaction of control. I wasn't a victim. I was a strategist, prepared to navigate the storm Evan had thrown at me. Step 3 would come soon enough, formalizing boundaries, involving our lawyers, and making it impossible for Samantha or Evan to rewrite reality to their favor. But for now, I sat in quiet triumph, surrounded by spreadsheets, highlighters, and a clarity that felt almost intoxicating. This was my battlefield, and for the first time since Evan's declaration, I felt like I had the upper hand. The following week felt like walking through a minefield. I had expected Evan to resist, maybe argue, but I hadn't anticipated the subtle, almost invisible ways Samantha would try to assert herself. It started with phone calls. At first, innocuous. A concerned friend warning me about stress, about how Evan might be overwhelmed. But the timing was too precise, the language too familiar. My lawyer confirmed my suspicion. Samantha was trying to unsettle me, testing my reactions, seeing if she could provoke mistakes. Next came Evan's sister, Karen, who called with her own subtle brand of guilt. "Laura, how can you do this? Evan's heart is breaking. He gave so much to you, to this life. Are you sure you're being fair?" Her words were carefully chosen, the emotional equivalent of a dart aimed at a specific nerve. And for a split second, I felt it. The old, familiar tug of guilt, the instinct to compromise, to appease. But then I remembered the spreadsheet, the hundreds of highlighted lines, every personal charge, every weekend trip, every boutique shopping spree. The truth was clear, and it was mine to wield. "Karen," I said calmly, my voice quiet but resolute, "Evan wanted freedom. Samantha has wanted her lifestyle. I'm simply ensuring that consequences match choices." There was a pause, then a sharp exhale. "You're cold," she said, a note of accusation lingering. "Not cold," I replied, "just precise." Even as Samantha and Karen attempted to pull me into an emotional web, I remained in control. I watched patterns emerge, whispered warnings, subtle misdirection, even an anonymous email to HR claiming I was unstable. They hoped to provoke me into overreaction, to jeopardize my job, but I remained calm, explaining to HR exactly what was happening. By the end of the day, the complaint had been dismissed, the threat neutralized. It was exhausting in a quiet way, the psychological warfare, the invisible pressure, but it also strengthened my resolve. I began to see the larger picture. Samantha had been weaving a narrative for years, one where she could have her lifestyle, her influence, and no consequences. It was time to unravel that narrative with nothing but truth. Evan, meanwhile, oscillated between detachment and irritation. He hadn't expected me to respond with strategy. He hadn't expected me to anticipate every subtle manipulation. I watched him carefully, noting his expressions, his silences. He wasn't a villain, not exactly, but he was complicit, passive in the chaos that Samantha had carefully orchestrated. Late one night, I reviewed the spreadsheet again. Each line was a story, each number a thread of the life Samantha had quietly imposed on mine. Spa days, boutique trips, weekend getaways, all paid for with my contributions. I felt a flicker of vindication, not in malice, but in the quiet satisfaction of clarity. For once, truth was on my side, and I would not let it slip away. By the end of the week, the pattern was undeniable. Samantha's manipulations had failed to provoke me. Karen's guilt trips bounced harmlessly off my composure. Evan's expectations for a compliant, begging partner had dissolved into uncertainty. And in that silence, I made a promise. To myself first, then to the universe. Truth and consequences would prevail. The storm was coming, but I was ready. And I knew that when the next confrontation happened, legal, financial, personal, I would step forward not as the woman betrayed, but as the strategist in control. The weekend arrived, and with it, the meticulous work that would change everything. I spread the credit card statements across the dining table, highlighter in hand, my laptop buzzing softly beside me. Hundreds of charges, dozens of weekends, months of lavish spending that were never ours. They belonged entirely to Samantha's version of luxury. Spa days, designer handbags, spontaneous trips with friends, decorating projects that yielded nothing but temporary satisfaction. Every line, carefully documented, told a story. And the story was clear. I had funded her lifestyle, unknowingly, for years. I took a deep breath, feeling a cold satisfaction I hadn't allowed myself before. It wasn't anger, it wasn't revenge in the usual sense. It was precision, strategy. By Monday, my lawyer and I were ready. We scheduled a meeting with Evan's attorney. Samantha, of course, had her own narrative prepared, a carefully crafted version, in which her non-financial contributions somehow justified entitlement to my assets. But when we walked into the room, I was calm, too calm. I slid the spreadsheet across the table. "These are the facts," I said. "Every personal purchase over $50 made on our joint credit cards has been highlighted. Household expenses in green, Samantha's personal spending in pink. The total, $155,000. A collective intake of breath. I could see the surprise ripple across the table. My lawyer leaned slightly forward, nodding. Evan's eyes were wide, and I caught the faintest flicker of panic in Samantha's face. "This," I continued, voice steady, "is not a demand. It is a reflection of reality. We will divide the joint assets and debts fairly, but Samantha's personal spending is an advance on any claim she may assert. That is, she owes $70,000 to equalize the division of property. However, if she assumes the full $38,000 in credit card debt and accepts zero spousal support, the $70,000 is waived." The room went quiet. The words hung there like a storm waiting to break. Samantha's lawyer opened his mouth to argue, but my lawyer's response was simple, precise, and devastating. The numbers do not lie. Your client wanted excitement, luxury, and a life of indulgence. It appears she has had one for years, funded by our client. This is the accounting. For a moment, I allowed myself to watch the tension unfold, the realization slowly dawning on everyone at the table. Samantha had built a life of entitlement on borrowed funds, and now it was impossible to argue against the record. I didn't gloat, not openly, but inside there was a quiet satisfaction in the inevitability of consequences. Every spa visit, every boutique purchase, every weekend getaway, it was all there in black and white. And for once, there was no ambiguity. Evan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had expected drama, tears, maybe a desperate attempt to negotiate or beg. Instead, he faced a calm, methodical truth that left no room for manipulation. Samantha's face paled, her carefully rehearsed narratives crumbling under the weight of documented facts. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the certainty of accountability. I left the meeting feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. The battle wasn't over, but the first strategic strike had been delivered, precise and unassailable. For the first time since Evan's declaration, I felt truly in control, not just of my finances, but of my life. The storm had arrived, but I was ready. Calmly, methodically, I had begun to turn betrayal into clarity, manipulation into exposure, and entitlement into consequence. 6 months had passed since that quiet Thursday when Evan sat across from me and declared, "The end of our life together." 6 months of spreadsheets, lawyer meetings, and carefully measured steps. 6 months of quiet strategy replacing frantic emotion. And now it was over. The divorce was finalized. Samantha had folded. Faced with the inevitable scrutiny of the documented expenses, she accepted the deal. Full responsibility for the $38,000 in credit card debt, zero spousal support, and no claim on my investments or property. Her half of the 401k was consumed by legal fees and debt, leaving her with nothing but the consequences of choices she had made long before. I won't pretend it felt like triumph in the usual sense. There was no gloating in the air, only the soft, almost cinematic quiet of justice served. The house, once filled with tension, now held only silence, peaceful, deliberate, mine. I had sold it, too many memories embedded in its walls, and bought a smaller condo downtown. A space that was entirely mine. I painted the living room a deep, daring blue. The color Evan had always said was too much. The color Samantha would have found shocking. I wanted to reclaim my space in every sense, to mark it with my own identity, my own choices. Samantha moved into a small one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat and took a hostess job at a chain restaurant, the first real job she had held in years. From the outside, it might have seemed cruel, but it wasn't vengeance. It was consequence. A life built on entitlement couldn't continue without the resources that had sustained it. The satisfaction wasn't in her hardship. It was in the clarity of cause and effect. Every decision has a consequence. Every choice, no matter how carefully masked with charm or manipulation, leaves a trace. And Samantha's trace had led her here. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the balcony of my new apartment, looking out at the city skyline. The air was crisp, and the sunset painted everything in shades of gold and rose. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace, not because I had won against someone else, but because I had reclaimed my own life. I planned a solo trip to the mountains later that month, a place I had long wanted to visit but had never dared to propose. Standing on a rugged peak, looking at the vast landscape stretching endlessly, I realized something profound. Freedom isn't about luxury or excitement. It's about choice. It's about standing on your own, unshaken by the expectations, manipulations, or betrayals of others. Evan had wanted an exciting life. Samantha had wanted luxury. I had wanted truth, and I had it. The quiet, deliberate consequence of my choices and steadfast clarity had given me something far more precious than either of them could ever understand: my independence. In the end, Samantha hadn't just lost a lifestyle. She lost the illusion of entitlement, the safety net of borrowed comfort. And I gained clarity, peace, and a reminder that life's most powerful victories are often silent, measured, and internal. Standing there alone, with the wind brushing against my face, I smiled softly. This was my moment, my life. and no declaration, no manipulation, no betrayal could ever take that from me again.